Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I want to get started today talking about what it was like for me at 17 being kicked out of the house by my Jehovah's Witness parents. So stay tuned for the rest of the video. Okay, so I do have to preface this story by telling you that if you were to ask my parents if they kicked me out of the house, their answer would be no. But they also maintain that they did not kick my sisters out of the house, and both of my sisters maintain that they were kicked out of the house. So it was more like, I guess, that they created a situation in which we all felt unwelcome. So I can understand why they feel that way, but I completely disagree. I was made to feel like they didn't want me to live there. So just keep that in mind. So if you haven't watched my previous video about coming out to my parents and telling them that I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness, you might want to go back and watch that because a lot of what I'm talking about is going to be referenced in this video. What had happened in the previous video is that I told my parents I was trying to convince them that I wanted to date this boy, and since he was worldly and I was a Jehovah's Witness, I wasn't allowed to. So I decided that I wanted to take a break from being a Jehovah's Witness, and in the end, I did manage to convince them that to allow me to date this boy that I had wanted to date. So my family doesn't place a lot of importance on college since they're Jehovah's Witnesses. So I wasn't planning on going to college, but I also wasn't planning on doing any pioneering or anything like that since I wasn't baptized, and I didn't really want to do any Jehovah's Witness activities. So I was kind of left with very few options. So what I decided was that I needed to get a job. So I needed to find something that was fairly close to my house since I didn't have a car. So I ended up getting a job at Office Max. And the day that I was supposed to start working at Office Max, it was a convention weekend. So there was a little bit of an argument with my parents about that, but I wasn't going to be capable of starting this job. They wouldn't hire me unless I could start training that weekend. So it was the weekend of May 1st, 2005. And so my parents went to the convention. They took my middle sister with them. She left me her car, and my oldest sister and her husband, they all went to the convention. So my whole family was gone out of town. And so I was in town by myself the day that I started work. So I did go to work, and it was pretty early in the afternoon when I got off work. So I decided that I was going to go visit my boyfriend, which was, I think, a pretty normal teenager reaction that the first time you have a car, you want to go do something. So I wanted to go to my boyfriend's house after work. So I was still wearing my uniform. I had my name tag on that I was really proud of. So yeah, I went over to visit my boyfriend, and we had only been dating for about 3 weeks. And when I got there, he was kind of in a bad mood, which kind of made me a little bit nervous. And then he told me that he wanted to talk. So what ended up happening was that he broke up with me that day. So when I went back to work the next day to complete my training, I told some of the guys that worked there, and I ended up dating another guy that I was working with at Office Max. So he's kind of important to my story because in the end, I ended up moving in with that boy's family. So we dated for a couple of weeks. It was very short. We only went out a handful of times. And to my parents' credit, they did allow me to stay out pretty late. I'm not sure what day of the week it was that we went out, but they allowed me to stay out past midnight. So I thought that was pretty generous that they allowed me to stay out till midnight. So midnight was my curfew. We had been going out a couple of weeks. We went out on a date. When we got back the night at midnight, he decided that he wanted to break up with me. So we got home probably about 10 or 15 minutes till midnight. So I was on par for coming in, before curfew hit. And but then he broke up with me. So we did sit in the car for a while and discuss. We had, a pretty long conversation. And so when I ended up going into the house, we had been parked out front. Going into the house, it was like 5 or 6 minutes past midnight. So I was actually home by curfew, but I came in past curfew. But it was a weeknight, I think, so my parents were still in bed because they worked. And they both got up pretty early. So when I came in, I just went straight to bed. My parents were asleep. And the next morning when I got up, they were both at work already. They worked pretty early. My mom was a bus driver and my dad worked pretty early in the morning. So when I got up, no one was there. And I was a pretty avid reader. So I got dressed, I had breakfast, and I went out onto the front porch to read a book. And my mom got home from her bus driving job between about 9 or 9:30. And she didn't seem very happy when she pulled in. But anyone who has a parent who yells a lot, as long as they're not yelling, you tend to kind of ignore that they're upset. So I just kind of, kept reading my book and let her be upset. And she stormed into the house and slammed the door. And I guess since I didn't react, that kind of upset her a little bit more. So I just kept reading my book. And about maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, she came out of the house very, very angry. And she started yelling at me and telling me that I was ungrateful and that since I came in past midnight, that I didn't respect their house rules, and that if I wasn't going to respect them, that maybe I shouldn't live there anymore. And she was very, very mean and rude. And it actually got to the point where she was cussing at me and, swearing at me. And we lived on a dead end, so we didn't have too many neighbors, but the neighbors did come out to see what she was screaming about, because she was screaming at the top of her lungs as loud as she possibly could, about how I was ungrateful and that, she didn't want me living there anymore. From only coming home one night late. And, she wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise. I was trying to explain to her what was going on and that I wasn't dating that boy anymore, but she wasn't having it. She didn't want to have a conversation. She simply wanted to yell at me. And I got fed up with it. So I just got up out of my chair and I walked off, and I never went back. All I had with me was my book and the clothes on my back, and I didn't have a house key or a bag or anything. I just literally got up from where I was sitting and took off walking. And she was screaming at me the whole way. She never stopped until I was out of sight, and I just kept walking. And that was the end of me living at home. I never went back. So what I ended up doing was marching down to Office Max, which wasn't too far from my house. And I told the boy that had just broken up with me the night before that my mom kicked me out of the house and I didn't have a place to stay. So he called his mom and she came to pick me up, and we had a conversation. She's a very sweet lady. Still to this day, my heart goes out to her. She's wonderful. Her and her husband are just some of the best people that you will ever know. They ended up taking me into their house for about 6 weeks. And I was only 17. I was, a couple of weeks from being 18, but I was only 17 years old. And they took me in like I was one of their own. They had a whole handful of kids, but, what's one more, I guess. They were very sweet. I love them dearly. And while I was there, I ended up having my 18th birthday. And growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, I had never had a birthday party before, so they threw me my very first birthday party, which was so sweet. It was absolutely perfect. I'll always remember it. I'll hold that memory dear to me for the rest of my life. So yeah, they allowed me to stay in their house. And during the time that I was staying in their house, I started dating another guy at Office Max. And we got pretty serious pretty quickly. And I ended up moving out of the family's house that I was staying with into the house that I actually currently live in. So we ended up getting engaged pretty quickly. I think it was only about 3 or 4 months after we started dating when we got engaged, but we were kind of a perfect fit. So it worked out that way. And my husband's family ended up taking me in, even though they didn't know me. They allowed me to live in their house, and they never made me feel like I was an outsider. So when I tell people that there are lots of good, kind-hearted people out there, I really mean it. I mean, I immediately found people who were willing to take me into their house. And 6 weeks later, I found another family who was willing to take me into their house. So it's pretty easy to find people who are nice and kind and good-hearted. My own parents kicked me out of the house, didn't want me living there. And 2 different families told me that they wanted me to live in their house. So I was very surprised by that. It still kind of takes me aback a little bit because I didn't expect such kindness from so many people so quickly. But they let me get on my feet and figure out what I wanted out of life. And I think it was quite a long time before I kind of explained to people what really happened. And my dad did end up calling a few weeks into me staying with the new family that I was staying with to ask me to come back home. But during that phone call, I could hear my mom screaming in the background still. So I did get an invitation from my dad to come back, but I don't think it was a real invitation. I mean, I think that he was honest and, earnest about wanting me to come back. But I don't think that my mom really wanted me to come back. I wasn't living up to the standards of what she thought I should do. So it was a little bit disheartening. But so that's the end of that story about how my Jehovah's Witness parents kicked me out of the house. But I do have to say that I think that it's pretty interesting that, my parents spend a lot of time going out in field service. My mom was a pioneer for a long time because she worked, a job that allowed her to work in the mornings and the afternoons, and she had midday open, and she had weekends off. So she did pioneer quite a bit. And I think it's pretty interesting that she spent so much time trying to bring other people into the religion. And with her own daughters, she kind of just gave up. I think that says something, not just about her, but about the religion as a whole, because there's a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that when they leave, their parents don't really fight for them. And like I said before, it was nice. At the time, I appreciated that there wasn't an emotional conversation associated with that, because I don't know if I could have handled that, frankly. But looking back, I wonder why they didn't fight for me, because they spend so much time trying to bring other people into the religion, and when their own children say that they don't want to do that, they don't even want to have a conversation about it. So emotionally and mentally, it was very hard for me to realize that my parents didn't care enough to fight for me. And it's very interesting, I think, that a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses have similar experiences. It was really, really hard going from living in a house where everyone had been Jehovah's Witnesses for their entire lives to living in a house where they were non-witnesses. The whole vibe of the houses that I moved into was very different from the house that I grew up in. There was a lot of yelling and tension and upset in my house, and the house that I moved into, everybody was very pleasant and happy and wanted to be around each other, which was very weird to me. They would all watch TV on the couch. That was the first time living in their house that I saw Harry Potter. That was a big no-no when I was growing up, but I think that they had several movies out by the time that I moved out of my parents' house. And, when it came on TV, they were all like, "Oh, Harry Potter, yeah." And I hadn't seen them. So they were like, "Yes, you have to watch Harry Potter. It's a big deal. You got to come sit down and watch Harry Potter." So it was pretty nice. It was relaxing. It was a big load off my mind, actually, to go from being a Jehovah's Witness to being a non-witness. And I think that if I had stayed at home, there would have been a lot more tension with me not wanting to be a witness and my parents wanting to be Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think it actually kind of worked out in the end. And it was really hard, but the families that I lived with made everything so much easier. There were so many people to talk to, even though they didn't understand what I was going through. They were willing to lend an ear and talk. My ex-boyfriend's sisters were lovely. They're sweet, sweet people. And they were willing to listen to the things that I did. And, while I was living in their house, there were a few mistakes that I made while I was living there. And they never treated me the way that my own parents treated me. They were very loving and kind and good-hearted. And you could see that they knew that I was struggling and they were trying to help me out. And that was very sweet of them. And I still appreciate everything that they did for me. So that's the end of that story. But I want you guys to stay tuned to my next video. I'm going to be discussing what it's like growing up in a house with a mother who has undiagnosed narcissistic personality disorder and an enabler father. So it's going to be an interesting mini series that I hope you guys stay tuned for. I'm going to be putting on several different videos. So stay tuned and keep watching. And thank you so much for watching today.